Marriage vote today. Irish citizens go to the polls over the redefinition of marriage. Officers indicted. A grand jury decides all 6 Baltimore police officers involved in the death of Freddie Gray will face charges.
Left, right, left.
Remembering fallen heroes. We visit Arlington National Cemetery as our nation prepares to mark Memorial Day.
Come mi sguarda, Gesù.
And words of wisdom. Pope Francis reminding us that Jesus gazes upon us as he gazed upon the apostles. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 22nd, 2015. Yeah, dear God, help us. Okay. Yeah. Can we just start whenever you're ready? Let's not wait to the top of the minute. Just go, please. Marriage vote today. Irish citizens go to the polls over the redefinition of marriage. Officers indicted. A grand jury decides all 6 Baltimore police officers involved in the death of Freddie Gray will face charges.
Left, right, left.
Remembering fallen heroes. We visit Arlington National Cemetery as our nation prepares to mark Memorial Day.
Come mi sguarda, Gesù.
And words of wisdom. Pope Francis reminding us that Jesus gazes upon us as he gazed upon the apostles. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 22nd, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. As Ireland votes on a referendum that could redefine marriage, bishops encourage every voter to reflect carefully. Election officials report a stronger than usual turnout across the nation of 3.2 million registered voters. Opponents argue redefining marriage would undermine the institution. They say it could trigger unintended legal consequences in Irish courts. And some voters say there's been a rush to push the referendum through.
It wasn't even debated properly. Just rushed through. Don't agree at all with it.
The results will be announced tomorrow. If the referendum passes, Ireland would be the first nation to redefine marriage by popular vote.
Cheers.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The first round of emails from Hillary Clinton's private server are now released. The State Department gave nearly 300 emails to House committee investigating the attack on the U.S. diplomatic post in Benghazi. One of the emails relates to reports of arrests of possible suspects in Libya. That previously unclassified email was reclassified today at the request of the FBI. And the White House defends its strategy against ISIS terrorism.
What this administration will continue to do is to implement the strategy that the president has laid out, which is to build up the capacity of local fighters on the ground in Iraq and in Syria to take the fight against ISIL in their own country.
President Obama expresses confidence in his administration's overall anti-terrorism strategy. However, Republican John McCain strongly disagrees.
It's just mind-boggling that the president could keep saying, and his spokesperson and others in the administration could keep saying what they're saying, while thousands of people are being butchered, burning bodies in the streets, executions, beheadings.
McCain thinks 10,000 U.S. troops should be deployed to help Iraq fight ISIS terrorists. David Drucker, the senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, is with us. Let's talk about the email release first. Do you think that the 300-some emails, or not quite 300, that have been released will satisfy this congressional panel?
No. And they're going to keep looking and looking and digging and digging. Look, there's a partisan disagreement going on here, but Republicans sincerely believe, even though the politics for them could be very good, they still sincerely believe on a substantive level, like there's a lot more to the Benghazi story than Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration have let on, and they want to get to the bottom of it. And, you know, the side benefit is it has been good politics because we would have never known about the emails or the private server if not for the Benghazi Select Committee.
Do you think by the time the election rolls around this will be old news, or do you think it will have an impact?
You know, since we have about 5 or 6 news cycles a day, it's the way these things go these days, it's possible that a year from now, all of this will be long forgotten. But this is potentially dangerous for Mrs. Clinton because the way this story is dripping out and leaking out, and you put it together with the Clinton Foundation news and everything else, there really could be an ongoing drip, drip, drip that could go all the way to November of 2016, and that's a risk for her.
There's a lot of distrust there. Talk a little bit, too, about the White House defending its so-called strategy against ISIS.
So I understand why the White House is doing this because they really have two not-so-good options. One, they can acknowledge that things aren't going so well and that is because their strategy isn't working. And that's going to just generate more headlines of White House acknowledges that they've failed. Or they can simply say that it's working despite the fact that it doesn't look like it's working, and some people might mock the idea that the White House won't acknowledge some failures. But the truth is, I would go with the option they picked. Politically, it's better. And over time, if things get better, then the White House will be able to say, we knew all along things would be okay.
And some Republican hopefuls are kind of being pushed about the Iraq War. I wonder how you see their responses. They're differing.
So most Republicans have settled on this idea that knowing what George W. Bush knew then, he made the right call. I would have made a similar call. Knowing what we know now, things would have been different. I would have acted differently, but you can't go back in time. I think that's politically defensible and probably where most of these Republicans need to be. One, because they're advocating for a much more hawkish, aggressive foreign policy than the Obama administration. They're dealing with the rise of the Islamic State, and they're refusing to take the idea of troops off the table as an option. And so if you're going to talk about the 2003 invasion and the fear of terrorism coming out of the September 11th, 2001 attacks, and you're talking about getting more aggressive, you need to sort of square the circle there. So I think they're doing the best they can.
You think foreign policy is going to be a big deal with this election?
It is right now, and if things don't change, that means it's a huge deal, maybe the biggest deal it's been since 1980.
David Drucker with the Washington Examiner. We always appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Well, a grand jury decides all 6 Baltimore police officers involved in the death of Freddie Gray will face charges. He died last month after being placed in police custody, and tonight, Mark Irons looks at what happens next.
After meeting for 2 weeks, a grand jury has decided to indict 6 officers in the death of Freddie Gray.
As our investigation has continued, additional information has been discovered.
Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby would not elaborate on what investigators found. Gray died last month after being taken into police custody. Investigators say his neck broke during a ride in a Baltimore police van. He died after a week in a coma. The medical examiner called Gray's death a homicide.
All day, we will fight for Freddie Gray.
His death sparked protests and riots. Crowds calmed after Mosby announced charges against the officers. Now that the grand jury has returned indictments, those charges have been amended and range from second-degree murder to misconduct in office. But attorneys for the officers say Mosby is too close to an attorney for Gray's family and should be taken off the case because of this conflict of interest. An accusation she dismisses.
The people of Baltimore voted for me to do my job and to carry out justice, and that's what I'm going to do as a state's attorney for Baltimore City.
I don't think it's about any one person, including the state's attorney. It's about justice prevailing. At the end of the day, the people of Baltimore want justice for Freddie Gray. They want our police department and our community to work together.
The officers will be arraigned in July. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mark. An ex-convict is arrested in connection with the deaths of a wealthy Washington family and their housekeeper. Darren Wint is charged with first-degree murder while armed. Police tracked him to New York City, then back to Maryland. He was arrested with several others late last night. Police say he is a former employee of the man who was murdered. They say the Savopoulos family was killed and their mansion set on fire in D.C. last week. Well, just as Jesus gazed at Peter, Jesus gazes at us. That from our Holy Father today. Pope Francis says we should ask Jesus how to change our hearts and repent.
Qual è oggi lo sguardo di Gesù su me?
The Holy Father says Jesus always looks at us with love. At Mass today, he reflected on 3 different types of looks that Jesus gave to St. Peter. Looks of calling, forgiveness, and mission. He urges the faithful to reflect on what Jesus is asking of us. And Pope Francis stopped at a few Vatican offices this morning in his signature Forward Focus. The quick visits included the congregations for the clergy and Catholic education. Pope Francis will release an encyclical on the environment most likely next month. Cardinal Peter Turkson, who is helping him write that document, is joining us from Rome. And Your Eminence, you led a conference on the environment this week. Can you sum up the message for us?
Well, it wasn't simply the environment. It was a particular type of seminar we'd organized. It was the climate economy. That was really the title of the seminar, and it was basically to help business people, politicians, finance people, and all recognize that it's possible to achieve, flourishing, prosperity, and do good business while responding to some needs of climate-related disasters and climate change issues.
What do you say to Catholics who are very skeptical of the climate change theory and environmentalists?
If an institution like the UN gets on this, then I think it's something that we also want to look at. But not simply even because the UN is doing it. The church is not. This is not the first time the church is expressing concern about environment. For us, the two things which go together is simply this: we cannot profess our love for God without caring for what He has made.
But there are critics who are wary of the Vatican even working with the UN on this. How do you see that?
These are things that the church, work together with the UN. So it is this, that, the UN as an institution comes up with so very many things. And the church, in its judicious liberty and discernment, see what it can, go along with the UN about, all with view to, protecting the human person and ensuring its common good, and what it cannot.
Your Eminence, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks to you, and thanks to you, Brian, for presenting this program.
You're welcome. Archbishop Oscar Romero takes one step closer to sainthood tomorrow. 250,000 people are expected for the Beatification ceremony in his native El Salvador. He was killed while celebrating Mass in 1980. Pope Francis declared him a martyr, saying he was slain out of hatred for the faith. The Church hopes the Beatification will be a point of hope for that nation. Coming up, Asia and Europe wrestle with the crisis of a surge of migrants seeking homes. And the families of servicemen who died in the attack on Pearl Harbor seek closure decades after the war ended. Lord, send forth your Holy Spirit to bring consolation and strength to persecuted Christians. #FreeToPray. A tweet from Pope Francis today, which he immediately followed with the same tweet in Arabic. Thanks for joining us on this Friday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. In a recent report, Caritas finds 1/3 of the surveyed countries lack reliable access to food. Caritas says supporting family and small-scale farming is key to ending world hunger. Our Catherine Zeltner spoke earlier today with the policy director for the church's humanitarian wing.
Martina, the report's goal is to end hunger by 2025. Is that realistic?
I think it is realistic. In fact, the goal is part of the report and also part of our global campaign, One Human Family, Food for All. It is realistic if we join our forces, on one hand, to improve agriculture, or meaning the conditions under which agriculture happens, so providing more resources, more seeds, more credits to small-scale farmers, and this is the report. And moreover, I think we waste food, 200 million tons in industrialized countries of cereal products. That equals the net food production of sub-Saharan Africa. So if we are able to waste such a lot of food, I think there is sufficient food for all. It's a matter of distribution and it's a matter of inequality.
I understand women play an important role in food security. Can you explain that?
Yes, I think in many countries women depend on agriculture. Globally it's 49%, and 73%, about 73% of economic active women worldwide depend on agriculture. Yet they have less access to resources, again, such as credit, seeds, land. And so they find themselves in very precarious conditions, which means that they are impacted by food in terms of health, which again means they will transmit hunger and poverty to their children. The FAO estimates that if we would give equal access to women with regards to resources equal than men, we could lift out more than 100 people out of hunger.
Martina Liebsch, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, Martina and Catherine, thanks. Myanmar's Navy picks up more than 200 migrants from 2 fishing boats. They were spotted off the Malaysian coast last night, where many have been fleeing on old wooden boats. The Muslim minority has been denied citizenship with little access to education or medical care in Malaysia. More than 3,600 migrants have washed ashore in Indonesia and Thailand since May 10th. Thousands more are believed to be trapped at sea. Meanwhile, in Italy, border police rescued nearly 150 migrants stranded off the coast overnight. Many women and children were on board, some in need of medical attention. Migration officials estimate more than 38,000 migrants have arrived in Italy by sea since January. More than 1,800 are thought to have died trying to cross the Mediterranean. Memorial Day this year focuses on the many who died during World War II, which ended 70 years ago this summer. But for some who perished at Pearl Harbor, there is still no closure for their loved ones. Susie Pinto reports.
Chet Jankowski and Bert Jacobson were Navy training buddies. When duty stations were handed out, they couldn't believe their good fortune.
They came up waving their orders in their hand and waving them in the face of my father, saying, "We got paradise. We're going to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii."
They were assigned to the USS Oklahoma. Jankowski was working in a boiler room below deck when the Japanese attacked. December 7th, 1941.
Planes coming in like crazy. I mean, you could reach out and touch a wing. We were just sitting ducks.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the...
Jankowski made it off the stricken battleship before it capsized. Jacobson wasn't so lucky.
Poor Bert, died before he knew there was a war going on.
Most of the more than 400 sailors and Marines who died on the Oklahoma were laid to rest at Honolulu's Punchbowl Cemetery, mixed together in common graves. Nearly 3/4 of a century later, the government is trying to identify them.
So that's a good one.
This one is the one you were talking about.
Yeah.
Dawn Silsby and her siblings never knew their Uncle Bert.
Our grandmother openly wept every year, every December 7th. And I think part of it was because she really didn't know where Bert was.
The siblings had given DNA samples in hope of locating some piece of him. Jacobson's family would like to reinter him in Arlington National Cemetery. But Oklahoma survivor Harold Johnson says his shipmates died together and they should rest in peace together.
I think they should stay where they're at and let people know why they're there.
Smoke, fire, woo. It's pretty hot.
Time and old age have clouded Jankowski's memory of Jacobson, but at 93, the old sailor is still haunted by that day of infamy.
I had a lot of friends that lost their life.
Susie Pinto, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, we discuss the future of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act with a member of Congress. And we visit Arlington National Cemetery, where thousands of small flags cover the hillsides ahead of Memorial Day. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. That's a prayer to the third person of the Holy Trinity as we approach Sunday's Feast of Pentecost. Thanks for joining us this Friday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. The Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act moves to the Senate after passing the House a week ago. It would prohibit most abortions starting with the 20th week of pregnancy. Kansas Congressman Tim Hulskamp joining us. And Congressman, you voted for the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. What about the arguments against it? What's your take on those?
Well, those arguments are devoid of scientific fact. It is, without a doubt, it's established scientific fact that unborn children as early as 20 weeks, perhaps earlier, can feel pain, intense pain. We believe even more intense than we feel as children and adults. And the other side continues to argue that's not the case. But science has progressed immensely since 1973, and we're trying to interject that scientific fact, that evidence in the debate about life. And I think we're making tremendous progress here in Washington.
Passage in the House came on the second anniversary of the conviction of abortionist Kermit Gosnell in Philadelphia. Do you think that helped it get through the House, that timing?
It really did. The House of Horrors of that late-term abortionist was shocking, even to, I believe, the promoters and supporters of abortion. I mean, they couldn't deny the facts. The gentleman was out of control. He murdered at least 3, perhaps 100 newborn infants. But I argued, as did others, that what he did after birth is morally is the same as before birth. He snipped their spines after birth, and when he failed at his abortion, and that 2-year anniversary of that shocking discovery gets to the heart of the grisly action of late-term abortion. I, of course, support life at not just in late term, but throughout the entire pregnancy. But this is the way we gain progress and get to the heart of the issue of when life begins and what's actually happening in our late-term abortion clinics all over this nation.
There's some question as to whether this can pass the Senate. There's pretty much no question about the fact that it will face a likely veto at the White House. Why move through with this abortion or with this legislation on late-term abortion when it's only going to end up facing a veto?
Well, as a Republican, I do recognize our party is the party of life. However, I have many of my colleagues that would rather not talk or even discuss the issue. They like to say they're pro-life during the campaign. But it was an uphill battle just to bring this to a vote, and in order to pass it in the future and put similar provisions in other must-pass legislation, we had to start with this bill on the floor. Again, it's education. It's, again, requiring the pro-abortion lobby to defend the late-term abortion practices where they kill 3 and 4 pound babies and that can feel intense pain. I mean, when we look back over the debate over partial birth abortion, it became education about when life begins. And I will say, particularly with our young folks, we see that the scientific fact, the evidence is undeniable. The unborn child is a baby, and he and she has life. And as we continue this debate, even bills that may not be signed by the president, I certainly agree he won't sign it. But if we get it through that Senate, it continues that discussion, that understanding as we build a culture for life. It will be one step, one heart, one soul at a time, and this is a tremendous progress in that direction.
Thank you for your courage in voting for life. Congressman Tim Huelskamp of Kansas, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And this Memorial Day weekend, we honor those who died while serving in our armed forces. Jason Calvi visits Arlington National Cemetery, visiting with soldiers who are remembering those who came before them.
1,000 soldiers on a special mission at Arlington National Cemetery to place an American flag near each headstone. These soldiers are all from the Army's Old Guard, a ceremonial regiment that dates back to 1948.
This needs to be done. This is something that we need to show our gratitude and know how much that we still care about them and that we're here for them.
Row after row of headstones, 228,000 here, but each one represents a real person with a family and cherished memories.
Kelly Griffith's brother Sammy was killed in Afghanistan in 2011.
Oh, he was hilarious.
She's now with TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors.
It was just really nice to see him honored in that way and to know that our loved ones are not forgotten. For us at TAPS, every day is Memorial Day.
Private First Class Mason Bermudez is taking part in this tradition for the first time. His first flag is for his grandpa, a Vietnam vet.
He was a really top-notch guy. Always found him extremely great person in general. Everything about him was just awesome, and I really loved him.
Specialist Nicholas Connell's father died in Iraq in 2007.
So thankful that he was one of the ones that fought for my freedom as well as I am for my brothers and sisters, and I'm glad that I could follow in his footsteps.
And a promise that those footsteps will never be forgotten. In Arlington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
And as we enjoy a Memorial Day weekend, please let us not forget what this weekend is about, to honor those who have given their lives so that we can live free. Also this Friday, today, May 22nd, we celebrate the feast of St. Rita of Cassia. She's patroness of impossible causes, and we ask for her intercession tonight. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We hope you enjoy a good holiday weekend. Join us Monday. We have a special Memorial Day edition of EWTN News Nightly. So we leave you tonight recalling some of this week's news in pictures. Good night and God bless you.